A family of sheepdogs stands in the snow and begs to be let into the house. A story that will touch everyone. What makes a person who has lost everything open their heart again? And can the desperate plea in the eyes of a freezing animal melt the ice that has bound the soul for many years? This story began in the harshest month of winter, in the village of Sosnovka, lost among the snowdrifts, where time seemed to have stopped along with the frozen rivers. Here, on the very edge of the village, in a house with walls blackened by time, Ignat Matveyevich Sokolov was living out his last days. 70 years had left deep furrows on his face, and endless fatigue had settled in his gray eyes. After the death of his wife Maria, he had walled himself in, shutting himself off from the world with a wall of silence and deaf irritation. His only companions were a portrait on the wall and the howling of the wind in the old chimney. That evening, the wind was particularly fierce. It threw handfuls of stinging snow against the windows and howled as if mourning someone. Ignat, wrapped in an old sheepskin coat, sat by the barely warm stove and listened to this dead music of winter. Suddenly, through the howling blizzard, he heard another sound, a quiet, insistent scraping on the bottom of the front door. He frowned. Who would come to see him? An old man whom the whole village considered a reclusive curmudgeon in such a blizzard. He rose heavily, went to the window, and pulled back the curtain. What he saw made his heart stop for a moment, then beat with dull, angry blows. Right outside the window, on the dazzling white snow, stood a family. A large German shepherd, its intelligent amber eyes staring straight at him. Next to her, huddled together, 4 puppies were shivering from the cold. Their mother, Alma, did not bark. She just stood and watched. There was no threat in her gaze, only a silent, desperate plea that was understandable without words in any language in the world. Ignat felt a wave of dull anger rising inside him. That was all he needed. Stray dogs at his doorstep, carriers of disease. He slammed his fist against the glass. The dog flinched, but did not retreat. She only pressed her puppies closer to her, one of which whimpered pitifully. "Get out," the old man whispered silently. He turned away from the window, sat back down by the stove, and tried to banish the image from his mind. But the amber eyes followed him. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested to know where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's get started. Ignat tried to convince himself that he didn't care about the stray dog and her litter. The village was full of stray animals. You can't save them all. And it wasn't his concern. He had enough of his own. He threw some wood into the stove, trying to drown out the quiet scratching at the door, which would start and then stop. He remembered how Maria, his late wife, used to feed all the cats and dogs in the neighborhood. Ignat would grumble, but deep down, he admired her kindness. "Every life is important, Ignas," she used to say, stroking another stray kitten. After she passed away, the house felt empty, and Ignat's heart grew cold. He didn't want to care about anyone anymore. He didn't want to get attached again, only to lose someone else. The scraping stopped. The old man breathed a sigh of relief. They must have gone to find another place. He went to the window and looked out again. The family hadn't gone anywhere. They had simply moved to the woodshed, trying to shelter from the wind behind a pile of logs. Alma was desperately digging a hole in the snowdrift to keep the puppies warm. One of them, the smallest, was barely moving. It lay a tiny dark lump on the snow, almost covered by the blizzard. Something inside Ignat stirred. He remembered how he and Maria had been unable to have children, how she cried at night, and he clumsily comforted her, hiding his own pain. The image of a mother desperately fighting for her children cut painfully into his heart. He frowned, struggling with himself. No, he didn't need this. These weren't his problems. He drew the curtain and returned to the stove. But he couldn't sleep that night. He tossed and turned on his hard bed, and the image kept reappearing before his eyes. Intelligent amber eyes and a tiny bundle covered in snow. In the morning, the blizzard subsided, leaving behind huge snowdrifts and a ringing silence. Against his will, Ignat's first act was to go to the window. There were no dogs by the barn. Thank God, he muttered, feeling a strange mixture of relief and inexplicable anxiety. They're gone. The day dragged on painfully. Ignat tried to occupy himself with his usual chores, chopping wood, clearing the path to the gate. But the work was not going well. He was constantly drawn to look toward the forest, where he assumed the dog family had gone. He scolded himself for this foolish weakness, but he couldn't help it. By evening, his anxiety became unbearable. The frost was getting stronger, and the old man knew that such a night in the forest could be the last for the little puppies. He remembered the smallest, almost motionless puppy over and over again. Unable to bear it any longer, he threw on his sheepskin coat, grabbed a lantern, and left the house. He didn't know why he was going or what he was going to do. His legs carried him to the forest. He followed faint tracks in the snow that led deeper into the thicket. After walking half a kilometer, he stopped. In a shallow ravine, under the roots of an uprooted spruce tree, he saw them. Alma was lying curled up, trying to keep the puppies warm with her body. Hearing footsteps, she raised her head and growled hoarsely, baring her fangs. Ignat froze, holding the lantern in front of him. In its light, he saw that the smallest puppy, the one he had noticed yesterday, was lying apart and not moving. It seemed as if it was no longer breathing. Alma nudged it with her nose and whimpered pitifully, but the puppy did not respond. At that moment, all of Ignat's anger and alienation collapsed. He saw before him not just a stray animal, but a mother who had lost her child. Slowly, showing that he meant no harm, he placed the lantern on the snow and took a step back. He returned home, but 10 minutes later he was back again. In his hands he carried a bowl of warm porridge and an old woolen blanket. He silently placed the bowl on the snow, away from the den, and laid the blanket nearby. Alma watched him warily, growling incessantly. Ignat said nothing. He simply turned and left, leaving the lantern to light up the clearing. Back home, he sat by the window for a long time, staring at the distant point of light in the forest. He didn't know if the dog would accept his help, but for the first time in many months, he felt that he had done something right, something that Maria would have approved of. The next morning, as soon as dawn broke, Ignat went back to the forest. An empty bowl and a neatly folded blanket with dog paw prints on it were waiting for him in the clearing. The lantern was out. There were no dogs anywhere. He felt a pang of disappointment. So they had left. Well, he had done what he could. He picked up the bowl and blanket and wandered home. But when he reached his yard, he saw them. Alma was sitting by his shed with her 3 puppies. She didn't approach the house, but she didn't leave either. She just sat there and waited. When she saw Ignat, she didn't growl. She just pricked up her ears warily. The old man understood. She had brought her children to him. She trusted him. It was a silent agreement, made without words. Ignat opened the barn door. "Come in," he said hoarsely. Alma hesitated for a moment, then pushed the puppies inside and followed them. Ignat brought them more food and a bowl of water. He didn't try to pet them or get close to them. He understood that trust had to be earned. He simply left them alone in the relative warmth and safety of his barn. The news that the unsociable Sokolov had taken in a pack of stray dogs spread through the village with incredible speed. The neighbors reacted with caution. Some tapped their fingers on their temples, some glanced warily at Ignat's yard. Stepan Zakharov, the local dog catcher, was particularly unhappy. Stepan was a harsh and pragmatic man. He believed that stray animals had no place in the village and did his job with frightening efficiency. Both people and animals feared him. When he found out about Ignat's new guests, he came to his yard that same day. His heavy, squat figure in his perpetually dirty sheepskin coat looked threatening. "Matveyich," he growled without greeting him. "I hear you've set up a kennel here. This is not right. The dogs must be caught." Ignat looked at him silently from under his gray eyebrows. "These are my dogs," he replied quietly but firmly. Stepan grinned, revealing a row of crooked teeth yellowed from tobacco. "Yours? Do you have documents for them? Passports, vaccinations?" "No. That means they're strays. And it's my job to catch strays. So come on, Matveyich. Don't cause any trouble. Bring them out, I'll take them." A muffled growl came from the barn. Alma sensed danger. Ignat took a step forward, blocking the barn door with his body. A cold rage rose inside him, one he hadn't felt in many years. This man had come to destroy the fragile world that was just beginning to take shape in his soul. "I said they're my dogs," he repeated, looking straight into Stepan's insolent eyes. "And you're not getting them. Get off my property." Stepan was taken aback by such a rebuff. He was used to people agreeing with him. "Are you out of your mind, old man?" he hissed. "I'll report you. You've turned this place into a den of vermin. The whole village is up in arms. They could attack people or livestock." "They don't attack anyone," Ignat replied sharply. "They're smarter than some people. Now go away before I get my pitchfork." The old man's gaze was such that Stepan understood he was not joking. The dog catcher spat on the snow, turned around, and walked toward the gate. "Well, watch out, Matveyich," he said over his shoulder. "You'll regret this. The law is on my side." The gate slammed shut. Ignat was left alone in the middle of the yard. He was breathing heavily. He knew this was only the beginning. Stepan would not back down so easily. But he had no intention of backing down either. Protecting this dog family, he felt for the first time in a long time that he was protecting something alive inside himself. He went into the barn. Alma stood over the puppies, ready to fight. Seeing Ignat, she stopped growling. He reached out and, to his surprise, was able to touch her head for the first time. She didn't pull away. She just closed her eyes for a moment, accepting his touch. At that moment, he realized that they were his pack, and he would fight for them to the end. Ignat knew that the barn was only a temporary shelter. Stepan could return at any moment, and he wouldn't be alone. He had to act. That same night, he moved the dog family into the house. He laid old sheepskins and blankets for them in the cold porch. Alma seemed to understand everything. She followed him without complaint, leading the puppies behind her. For the first time in 2 years, life returned to Ignat's house. The quiet whimpering of the puppies, their bustle, the steady breathing of sleeping Alma. These sounds filled the emptiness that had oppressed him for so long. He sat by the stove and listened to this new music of his home. He caught himself smiling as he watched the puppies play clumsily with each other. He even gave them names. He named the boldest and largest one Thunder, the timid and light-colored one Snowflake, and the most nimble and curious one Wind. But the threat had not gone away. The next day, Ignat's neighbor, Pavel Smirnov, stopped by. He was one of those who had been looking at his yard with dissatisfaction. "Ignat Matveyevich," he began, shifting from foot to foot. "I'm sorry, but the people in the village are worried. You have big, fierce dogs. We have children and livestock. Stepan says he's acting according to the law." Ignat sighed. He understood his neighbor's fears, but how could he explain to them what was going on in his heart? "Pavel, come in and take a look at these fighting dogs," he suggested. Pavel cautiously peered into the porch. He saw Alma, who only raised her head and looked at him warily, and 3 puppies stretching their necks curiously. "They almost died of hunger and cold," said Ignat. "How can you give them up to their death now?" Pavel said nothing. He could see that the dogs were not aggressive, but fear and rumors were stronger. "You'll have to figure this out somehow, Matveyevich," he muttered as he said goodbye. "Otherwise, things will turn out badly." Ignat realized that he was alone against the whole village, and against Stepan, who was surely already plotting some kind of dirty trick. He felt like he was in a besieged fortress. And in that fortress, besides him, there were 4 other lives for which he was now responsible. Stepan didn't keep him waiting long. He didn't storm Ignat's house openly. He chose a different tactic, a cunning and cruel one. One morning, when Ignat went out into the yard, he found strange pieces of meat in the snow, generously sprinkled with something white. The old man's heart sank. Poison. He froze in horror at the thought of what might have happened if he had let the dogs out. He carefully gathered all the pieces with a shovel and burned them in the stove. That same day, he went to Stepan. He found him at the gate of his own house. "What are you doing, you monster?" Ignat shouted, unable to restrain himself. Stepan just smiled crookedly. "I don't know anything," he said. "Maybe some foxes were running around and lost some meat. Your yard isn't fenced in. Anyone could have gotten in." The lie was so obvious that Ignat clenched his fists until his knuckles hurt. He knew he couldn't prove anything. He was powerless against this meanness. "If anything happens to them, Stepan," he croaked, "I'll get you out of the ground." "Trying to scare me, old man?" The dog catcher sneered. "You'd better keep an eye on your animals. Otherwise there could be an accident. Someone might accidentally leave a trap in the forest, for example." It was a direct threat. Ignat returned home feeling devastated. He felt trapped. He couldn't keep the dogs locked up forever. They needed to move around, to walk. But letting them out of the gate was deadly dangerous. He decided to reinforce the fence and patch up all the holes so that the puppies wouldn't accidentally run out into the street. While working in the yard, he constantly felt someone's gaze on him. It was Stepan. He often drove by in his old Niva, deliberately slowing down and looking at Ignat's yard. It was psychological warfare. Ignat knew that the dog catcher was waiting for him to make a mistake, and that mistake would cost his charges their lives. The tension grew with each passing day. Days turned into weeks. Ignat's life took on a new, unfamiliar routine. He got up early, stoked the stove, and cooked porridge, not just for himself, but for 4 pairs of hungry eyes. He took Alma and the puppies out into the fenced yard, watching carefully to make sure none of them slipped through the gate. The puppies grew before his eyes. Grom was already trying to bark in a bass voice, chasing his own tail. Vet, the most restless, explored every snowdrift and every crack in the barn. And Snezhinka, the quietest and most affectionate, always stayed close to Ignat, poking his cold snout into his hand. The old man found himself talking to them. He told them about his life, about Maria, about how they had dreamed of a big house full of laughter. The dogs listened, their heads tilted to one side, and in their intelligent eyes he found more understanding than he had seen in people's eyes in the last 2 years. The ice in his heart melted, revealing long-forgotten feelings, tenderness, care, fear for those who had become dear to him. He almost forgot about Stepan, lulled by this fragile happiness. But the threat had not disappeared. It was simply lying in wait, biding its time. One evening, he noticed that Snowflake had become lethargic. She refused to eat, and her nose was hot and dry. The puppy lay in the corner, wrapped in a sheepskin coat, whimpering quietly and pitifully. By nightfall, she had a fever. Her little body was shaking. Ignat froze. He was completely helpless. There was no veterinarian in their village. The nearest clinic was in the district center, 30 kilometers away on a snow-covered road. And he couldn't go there during the day without attracting attention. The thought that he might lose this puppy too was unbearable. It would be a betrayal of Alma, who had entrusted her children to him, and a betrayal of the memory of Maria, who would never have given up. He made a decision. At night, when the whole village was asleep, he would take his old Kopeka out of the garage. Ignat waited until midnight. The streets of Sosnovka were deserted and silent, covered with a thick blanket of snow. He carefully wrapped the shivering Snowflake in an old coat and picked her up. Alma paced anxiously, whimpering. "I'll bring her back," whispered the old man, looking into the dog's eyes. "I promise." He rolled the car out of the garage by hand so as not to make any noise with the engine, and only started it when he was a good distance from the house. The engine coughed discontentedly, but started. The road was difficult. Frozen ruts, snow drifts. Ignat didn't speed. He drove slowly and carefully, listening to every breath of the little creature in the passenger seat. In the regional center, he easily found a 24-hour veterinary clinic, a small house with a brightly lit window. The door was opened by a young woman in a medical gown. It was Katerina, the local veterinarian. Seeing an elderly man with a sick puppy in his arms, she led him into the examination room without a word. Katerina worked quickly and professionally. After examining Snejinka, she diagnosed a viral infection. "Another day, and you wouldn't have been able to save her," she said as she gave the puppy an injection. Puppies that grow up on the street have very weak immune systems. She gave Ignat some medicine, wrote out a treatment plan, and strictly forbade the puppy from coming into contact with any dogs other than his mother. Ignat wanted to pay, but Katerina stopped him. "I know who you are," she said unexpectedly. "I've already had a call from your village. They complained about a pack of aggressive dogs. But something tells me that's not the case here." Ignat tensed. "Stepan?" he asked hoarsely. Katerina nodded. "That's him. We've had a long-standing conflict. He delivers captured animals to the shelter. But the condition they arrive in, it's better not to talk about it. Many of his methods are illegal, but it's difficult to prove anything. Be careful with him. He's vindictive." Returning home in the early hours of the morning, Ignat felt exhausted, but at the same time, hope flickered in his heart. He was no longer alone. He had an ally, even if he was in another city. After the injection, Snezhka felt a little better. She stopped trembling and fell asleep on his lap. He arrived in the village when the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east. He parked the car in the garage and carried the puppy into the house. Alma rushed to him, sniffed her baby, and, satisfied that everything was all right, gratefully licked Ignat's hand. The treatment was long and difficult. Ignat became a real nurse. He gave her injections, fed her herbal teas, and spoon-fed her. He hardly slept, listening to her breathing. During those days, he became even more attached to his charges. He realized that their fate was now inextricably linked to his own. A week later, Snežinka began to recover. She regained her appetite and started playing with her brothers again. Ignat felt a huge sense of relief. It seemed that the worst was behind them. But he was wrong. One Sunday morning, while walking around his plot, he made a terrible discovery. Right by the fence, in the place where Vetter liked to dig, a large rusty trap was hidden in the snow. It was set and covered with branches. One wrong move by a curious puppy, and the trap would have snapped shut, breaking its paw. The blood drained from Ignat's face. This was Stepan's work. There was no doubt about it. He had crossed the line. It was one thing to leave poison in plain sight, but it was quite another to set a treacherous, hidden trap for a defenseless puppy. Rage, cold and sharp as a knife blade, overwhelmed the old man. He carefully unloaded the trap, picked it up, and headed straight for the dog catcher's house. He didn't shout. He walked up to Stepan's gate and threw the heavy trap with all his might at his fence. The metal clanged loudly against the wood. "One more of those things near my house, Zakharov." Ignat growled so loudly that he could be heard at the other end of the street. "And I'll nail you to the tree with that trap myself." Stepan jumped out onto the porch. His face was contorted with rage. "What do you think you're doing, you old fart?" he yelled. But Ignat wasn't listening anymore. He turned around and walked away. He had done what he had to do. He had shown that he wasn't afraid. But there were witnesses to the scene. Pavel Smirnov, the same neighbor who had come to Ignat with complaints, was on his way to the store. He saw the rusty trap, Ignat's rage, and Stepan's malice. And for the first time, doubt arose in his heart. He had always considered Stepan an unpleasant person, but necessary for order. But the trap hidden by the old man's fence was not about order. It was about personal revenge, about meanness. He said nothing, just walked by, nodding to Ignat. But his gaze had changed. There was no longer condemnation in it. There was confusion. Ignat returned home and sat for a long time, staring out the window. He knew that his open challenge would not go unanswered. Stepan was not the type to forgive humiliation. Now the war had entered an open phase. No one knew how it would end. But at that moment, Snežinka ran into the room. She had completely recovered from her illness. The puppy ran up to Ignat, nudged his knee with her nose, and barked happily, wagging her tail. Ignat lowered his hand and stroked her. Looking into her lively, clear eyes, he realized he had no choice. He would stand his ground until the end. He would not let evil prevail. Not in his home, not in his world. He was ready for the next blow, not knowing where it would come from. Tension in the village grew. After the incident with the trap, the residents divided into two camps. Some continued to support Stepan, believing that he was bringing order, and that old Sokolov and his dogs were the source of the problems. Others, like Pavel Smirnov, began to have doubts. The story of how Ignat had taken a sick puppy to the city at night, thanks to the chattiness of a nurse from the clinic, also leaked out to the village. This act did not fit with the image of a crazy old man who took in dangerous animals. He spoke of kindness and responsibility. Stepan sensed that public opinion was beginning to waver, and this infuriated him even more. He decided to strike from another angle, the bureaucratic one. He wrote an official complaint to the district administration, painting a very grim picture. He mentioned the aggressive pack, the unsanitary conditions, and the threat to the life and health of residents. He demanded that the animals be removed immediately. Ignat found out about this when a young lieutenant named Anisimov came to his house. He was not a local and clearly did not want to get involved in village squabbles. "Ignat Matveyevich, we have received a complaint about you," he said, shifting awkwardly in the hallway. "I am obliged to respond. I need to inspect the conditions in which the animals are kept." Ignat silently led him into the house. Anisimov was surprised to see that the dogs were kept clean. He saw Alma lying quietly in her place and 3 well-fed, playful puppies. He noticed no aggression. "Have they been vaccinated? Do you have their papers?" the police officer asked, more for form's sake. "We're working on it," Ignat replied, remembering his conversation with Katerina. "The vet has already examined them. They pose no threat." Anisimov sighed. "I understand, Matveyevich. But a complaint is a complaint. A commission will come. You'll have to legalize their stay somehow. Otherwise, I'm afraid Stepan will get his way." The visit from the local police officer was a cold shower for Ignat. He realized that his determination and the pitchfork in his hands were not enough. He was up against the system, the law, which Stepan skillfully used to his advantage. What could he do about it? He had no money for lawyers, no strength to fight the officials. Despair began to creep up on him again. That evening, he sat for a long time looking at old photographs. Here he was with young Masha at their wedding. Here they were building this house. Here she was planting flowers in the front yard. She was smiling in all the photos. Maria never gave up. She always found a way out. "What would you do, Masha?" he whispered, looking at her portrait. Then his gaze fell on an old box where his wife kept her most precious belongings. He hadn't opened it since she died. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside, among letters and mementos, lay her diary. He had never read it before, considering it an invasion of her privacy. But now he felt that he might find the answer in it. He began to read. With each page, the world of his wife opened up before him, a world he had not fully known. She wrote about her love for him, her dreams, her sadness that they had no children. And she wrote a lot about animals. She described every kitten she had rescued, every dog she had fed. It wasn't just compassion. It was her philosophy. She believed that kindness to the most defenseless creatures was what made a person human. And on the last page, written shortly before her death, he read words that pierced his heart. "If anything ever happens to me, Ignatia, take care of someone. Don't let your heart turn to stone. Love doesn't die, it just changes form." Ignat closed the diary. The tears he had held back since the funeral flowed down his cheeks. He understood everything. It was her last will and testament. And this family of dogs that had appeared on his doorstep in the bitter cold was no accident. It was her farewell gift, a chance for him to start living again, not just existing. And he couldn't let that chance slip away. He would fight, not just for the dogs, for himself, for the memory of Maria. The next day, Ignat called Katerina. He told her about Stepan's complaint and the upcoming commission. "I'll do everything," he said firmly. "Vaccinations, passports. What else do you need?" Katerina was silent on the other end of the line, then said, "Ignat Matveyevich, that may not be enough. Stepan will insist that they are stray animals and that he has the right to take them away under the contract. We need to prove that they are yours, that they lived with you before." "But that's not true," Ignat said, flustered. Sometimes, to protect the truth, you have to be cunning, Katerina replied. Do you have any old photographs with other dogs? Maybe with your wife? Ignat thought for a moment. Yes, they had once had a dog, back when they were young, a mongrel named Pirate. He rummaged through an old album. There he was, Pirate, black, shaggy, with intelligent eyes. And in several photos, Maria was next to him. And then it dawned on Ignat. He found a photo of Maria hugging Pirate. The dog in the photo was old and gray, and although it was a mutt, something in its outline, in the shape of its head, vaguely resembled a sheepdog. It was a weak clue, but it was something. He told Katerina about his idea. She supported him. This is a chance, she said. Stepan will claim that your Alma is a stray, and you will say that she is the daughter of your old dog, whom everyone in the village remembered. That she was born here, then ran away, and now she has returned home with her puppies. The plan was risky, almost adventurous. It was based on half-truths and old memories. But Ignat had no other choice. The commission was due to arrive in 3 days. He had only 3 days to prepare for the most important battle of his life. He had to convince not only the officials, but the entire village of his story. He needed witnesses to corroborate his words. And the first person he decided to go to was Pavel Smirnov, the man who had seen the trap, the man whose soul was already filled with doubt. Ignat approached the Smirnovs' house not empty-handed. An old, yellowed photograph was clutched in his frozen fingers. He knocked on the door. Pavel opened the door, his face showing surprise and caution. Matveyich, what's happened? We need to talk, Pavel, Ignat said quietly, not out in the cold. Can I come in? They sat down in the kitchen. Olga, Pavel's wife, silently placed 2 cups of hot tea on the table. Ignat laid the photograph on the oilcloth. It showed a young, smiling Maria hugging a shaggy black dog. Do you remember Pirate? Ignat asked. Pavel looked closely at the photo. Well, vaguely. I was just a kid. I remember a dog running around your yard. That's him, Ignat nodded. He was a very kind dog. All the kids teased him, but he never said a word. So? Alma, who's with me now? She's his daughter. He got carried away in his old age with some stray sheepdog. The puppies were taken away, but this one, the wildest, found a home in the forest. I fed her, but she wouldn't let me touch her. And now you see, trouble has forced her to come back, with her children. Ignat spoke calmly, looking Pavel straight in the eye. There was no lie in his voice. It was a story that he had made true for himself. He didn't ask Pavel to lie. He asked him to believe him. Pavel was silent for a long time, shifting his gaze from the photograph to the old man's face. He wasn't remembering the dog Pirate. He was remembering the rusty trap in the snow. He remembered Stepan's angry eyes. And he remembered how this old man, whom everyone considered a vagrant, had gone out in the middle of a blizzard to rescue a tiny puppy. The commission will arrive, Ignat continued. Stepan will get what he wants if no one stops him. They're not animals, Pavel. They're a family, just like yours. Olga, who had been listening to the conversation, suddenly said, Pasha, I remember that Pirate. He was a good dog. And Maria, may she rest in peace, loved him very much. That settled everything. Pavel looked up at Ignat. All right, Matveyevich, I'll confirm it. I remember everything. From that moment on, everything changed. The story of the legendary pirate's daughter returning to her family home began its journey through the village. Pavel, feeling responsible, retold it to his old uncle Fyodor, the village's chief authority and keeper of all local tales. Uncle Fyodor, who disliked Stepan for his cruelty, not only believed him, but also added colorful details of his own. He remembered how he himself had seen little Alma as a puppy, and how she was a copy of her father, only she took after her mother. The village grapevine worked faster than any internet. By the evening of the next day, half of Sosnovka was discussing not a pack of stray dogs, but Sokolov's dogs, who had finally returned to their owner. This story flattered the village's pride. It was familiar and understandable. It turned an unpleasant incident with stray animals into a touching saga of loyalty and a return to one's roots. Stepan was the last to find out about everything. He flew into a rage. He rushed into Uncle Fyodor's yard, waving his arms. "What kind of fairy tales are you making up, old man?" he yelled. "What daughter of pirate? Your pirate died 20 years ago." But Uncle Fyodor was not easily intimidated. "And how do you know that, Zakharov?" he asked calmly, looking at the dog catcher over his glasses. "You were still crawling under the table back then. We live here, we remember, and we remember your traps too, and your poison is still fresh in our memory. So get out of here, and do it nicely." Stepan faltered. He saw that he was losing his last support. His image as the village medic was crumbling, and in its place emerged the image of a petty and cruel avenger. He realized that he was losing the information war. But he still had his trump card, the official commission, and he was sure that the officials would not be swayed by village tales. On the appointed day, a government UA's vehicle pulled up to Ignat's house. Two people got out. A stern, middle-aged woman in a uniform jacket who introduced herself as Inspector Vera Pavlovna, and a young man with a folder, her assistant. Stepan was already waiting for them at the gate, smiling obsequiously. "Here you are, comrades inspectors," he said busily. "This is the hotbed. Please take action." Vera Pavlovna gave him a cold look and entered the yard. Ignat followed her nervously. Almost the entire village gathered behind the fences of neighboring houses, like spectators at a theater. Everyone was waiting for the outcome. The commission passed into the porch. Alma, sensing strangers, growled softly, but Ignat put his hand on her head to calm her down. The puppies peered out curiously from behind their mother. "So," began Vera Pavlovna, looking around the room, "a complaint about 4 stray animals. 1 adult and 3 puppies," Ignat corrected her. "Posing a threat to the public," the inspector finished imperturbably. "They pose no threat," Ignat said firmly. "And they're not stray. They're mine." Stepan snorted. "Show us the documents for the dogs," demanded Vera Pavlovna. "The documents are being processed," replied Ignat. "We've already contacted the vet. But these aren't just dogs from the street. This is my story." And he began to tell it. About Pirate, about Maria, about how Alma came home. He spoke simply, without embellishment, and his words sounded sincere. He showed her an old photograph. The inspector glanced at it. "That's not proof," she said dryly. "Any mutt looks like another. We need facts, witnesses." Stepan grinned triumphantly. He was confident of victory. And at that very tense moment, when it seemed that all was lost, the gate to Ignat's yard creaked. Pavel Smirnov entered. "I am a witness," he said loudly and clearly. "I remember Ignat Matveyevich's dog, Pirate, and I can confirm that this dog, Alma, is indeed his daughter. I saw her here when she was still a puppy." Vera Pavlovna raised her eyebrow in surprise. Stepan turned red. "He's lying," he shouted. "Sokolov put him up to it." "And I remember," came the loud voice of Uncle Fyodor from the street, who also couldn't stand it and entered the yard. "The whole village remembers. Sokolov is the owner of these dogs, and Zakharov is a dog killer and a liar. Behind him, other neighbors murmured in agreement. The inspector looked confusedly at Ignat, then at the indignant residents, then at Stepan, who was red with anger. The situation was clearly getting out of control and was no longer a formal inspection. And then something happened that no one expected. The small gate leading from the porch into the house, which Ignat had hastily closed, creaked open. The most curious puppy, Vetter, slipped out. Blinded by the daylight and excited by the crowd, he saw his neighbor's chicken, which had somehow slipped into the yard, and rushed toward it with a joyful yelp. The chicken flew up onto the fence with a panicked clucking. Stepan saw this as his last chance. "Look!" he yelled, pointing at the puppy. "There she is, aggression. They're attacking a domestic bird. I told you so." He lunged sharply toward the puppy, not intending to catch it, but only wanting to heighten the panic and demonstrate the threat to the commission. But Alma, who had been standing motionless until that moment, reacted with lightning speed. She did not rush at Stepan. With a single leap, she was between him and her puppy. She didn't bare her teeth or try to bite. She simply stood up like a living shield, and a low, guttural growl escaped from her chest. It wasn't a bark, but a menacing warning that sent a chill down the spine of everyone present. Everyone froze. The shocked commission, the enraged Stepan, the frightened puppy, and Ignat, whose heart stopped for a moment. In the hanging silence, the roar of a mother protecting her child sounded louder than any words or evidence. The silence rang out for only a few seconds, but it seemed like an eternity. Vera Pavlovna, the inspector, did not look at the puppy or the enraged Stepan. She looked at Alma. She did not see an aggressive animal in front of her, but a mother ready to do anything for her child. It was a language that required no translation and no documents. She slowly lowered her notebook. "Stepan Petrovich," she said in an icy tone that did not bode well. "Your attack was completely unprofessional and could have provoked the animal. A mother's protective reaction is instinct, not aggression." Stepan opened his mouth to protest, but the inspector stopped him with a gesture. "I saw everything," she said curtly. "Mr. Sokolov," she turned to Ignat, "you have 1 month to get all the necessary documents for the dogs. I will personally make sure that the veterinary service assists you. At this point, I see no grounds for confiscating the animals." She turned, and without looking at anyone else, headed for the exit of the courtyard. Her assistant scurried after her. Stepan remained standing in the middle of the courtyard, pale, his jaw hanging open. His plan had failed with a resounding crash. He had suffered a public defeat. The villagers, who had been silently watching the scene, began to disperse. But now there was no fear in their eyes as they looked at Stepan, only undisguised contempt. Pavel Smirnov approached Ignat and shook his hand firmly. "Hang in there, Matveyich. We're with you." Uncle Fyodor grunted approvingly and shook his fist at Stepan. When everyone had left, Ignat was left alone with his family. He approached Alma and knelt down in front of her. She stopped growling and nudged him on the shoulder with her wet nose. He hugged her around the neck and buried his face in her thick fur. He had won. They had won. But he felt that this was not the end. A man like Stepan would not forgive such humiliation. He would definitely try to take revenge. The victory before the commission united Ignat and his few supporters. The very next day, Katerina arrived. She brought everything they needed: vaccines, microchips, and forms for veterinary passports. While she was busy with the dogs, Ignat told her about the events of the previous day. "You acted very bravely, Ignat Matveyevich," she said, giving Grom an injection, which he endured stoically. "But you're right. Stepan won't calm down. He has a contract with the administration. If he doesn't meet his capture quota, he loses money. And after such a public fiasco, he'll take revenge out of principle. What else can he do? Asked Ignat. Anything, Katerina replied seriously. He's operating on the edge of the law. He might try to plant something, stage a provocation. You need to be very careful. And, she paused for a moment, you need a good fence, a reliable one, so that not even a mouse can get through. Katerina's words made Ignat think. His old picket fence was only good for marking the boundaries of his property. It was no serious barrier. But as a simple pensioner, he had no money for a new, solid fence. That evening, he shared his concerns with Pavel Smirnov. Pavel listened and frowned. Yes, a fence is important, he agreed. Katerina is right. With a neighbor like Stepan, you need to build a fortress. Pavel was a hard-working and thorough man. He worked at the local sawmill and knew a thing or two about wood. Wait, Matveich, he said after a moment's thought. I have an idea. I'll talk to the guys. The next day after work, 3 men approached Ignat's house. Pavel, Uncle Fyodor, and another neighbor, Semen, who was silent and strong as an oak. They did not come empty-handed. Pavel brought tools, and Semyon drove up his old tractor with a trailer loaded with thick pine posts and boards. What are you up to? Ignat was taken aback by this unexpected reinforcement. We're going to have a community work day. Uncle Fyodor boomed. It's not right for a man like you, a hero of the village, to hide behind a rotten fence from all sorts of jerks. We're going to build a fortress. And the work began. The men worked together smoothly and quickly. They pulled out the old posts, dug in new ones, and nailed down fresh, resin-scented boards. Olga, Pavel's wife, and other neighbors brought hot tea in thermoses and pies. Ignat's yard, which until recently had been a symbol of alienation, became the center of community life. People worked, joked, and discussed the latest news. It was more than just building a fence. It was a declaration. The village was showing Stepan that Ignat Sokolov was no longer alone, that people stood behind him. Ignat helped as best he could, handing tools and bringing boards. He looked at these people, who until recently had considered him a weirdo and a threat, and couldn't believe his eyes. A warm, almost forgotten feeling of unity grew in his heart. He was once again becoming part of his small world, his village. By Sunday evening, the work was finished. A tall, sturdy, solid fence surrounded Ignat's house, which could not be broken down even with a battering ram. It had a new, reliable gate. When everyone had left, Ignat stood in the middle of the yard for a long time, looking at this creation of human kindness. He felt safe. But somewhere deep down, an uneasy feeling stirred. Stepan couldn't have missed the construction. He couldn't fail to understand that this was a challenge thrown down to him by the entire village, and his response would most likely be asymmetrical. He would strike from where no one expected it. Stepan really did see everything. He sat in his house like a spider in a web, watching the bustling activity at his neighbor's house. Every movement, every blow of the hammer was like a slap in the face to him. His hatred for Ignat had grown into an obsession. The old man hadn't just taken in the dogs. He had stolen Stepan's authority, his power, his sense of self-importance. He had turned him from the terror of all the stray dogs into a laughingstock. And for that, he had to pay. Stepan understood that now. After the commission's intervention and the public outcry, he couldn't act openly. Poison and traps were too risky. He could get caught red-handed. He needed a plan that would destroy Ignat and his dogs, but leave Stepan himself clean. and he found such a plan. He remembered the old peat bogs behind the village, a huge area abandoned since Soviet times. In the summer, fires often broke out there. Dry peat could smolder underground for weeks, and it was almost impossible to extinguish. Now, in winter, everything was covered with snow. But Stepan knew one place, an old, abandoned shed on the very edge of the peat bogs, where the local men sometimes gathered to drink away from the women. There was always dry kindling and old newspapers there. And from that shed to the forest, which came right up to the back of Ignat's plot, it was just a stone's throw. The plan was devilishly simple. He would start a fire, a small, localized one. Just the old shed would go up in flames. Then the wind, which at this time of year almost always blew toward the village, would do the rest. The fire would spread to the dry grass and bushes, and from there to the forest. And if everything went as he planned, the flames would reach Ignat's buildings. No one would ever prove that it was arson. Just an accident. A coincidence. And in the confusion of the fire, when everyone was saving their homes, who would notice that Ignat's dogs had simply disappeared? At night, when Sosnovka was fast asleep, Stepan put his plan into action. He dressed in dark clothes, took a can of gasoline with him, and made his way to an abandoned shed on the peat bogs. There was not a soul around, only the crunch of snow under his feet and the howling of the wind. He doused the dry boards with gasoline, threw a match, and ran away. The flames shot up instantly, greedily devouring the old wood. Satisfied that the fire was burning well, Stepan quickly returned to the village, taking a wide detour. He lay down in bed, but did not sleep. He lay there listening to the wind, gathering strength, and waited. The first to sense something was wrong was not a human being. It was Alma. She was sleeping in the hallway at Ignat's feet when her sensitive nose caught a distant, barely discernible smell of burning. She raised her head and listened warily. The smell grew stronger. She stood up, went to the door, and whimpered softly. Ignat woke up. "What is it, girl? What happened?" He opened the door and also smelled the acrid odor. He looked out the window facing the backyard. His blood ran cold. Far away, beyond the forest, the sky was painted an ominous orange. There, away from the peat bogs, a fire was raging. And the wind, strong and gusty, was driving a wall of fire and smoke straight toward their village. Ignat instantly understood the gravity of the situation. The dry winter forest could go up in flames like gunpowder. And it was only a stone's throw from the forest to his house and outbuildings. He quickly got dressed, rushed out into the yard, and began to bang on an old iron rail hanging from the barn, an improvised alarm bell that hadn't been used in many years. The alarming, rattling sound broke the silence of the night. One by one, lights began to come on in the windows of neighboring houses. The village woke up to a new, fiery threat. People ran out into the street looking in panic at the crimson glow. "Fire! The forest is on fire!" Cries rang out. Chaos broke out in the village. Some people tried to call the district center and the fire department. Others grabbed buckets and ran to the well. Pavel Smirnov quickly organized the men. "Women and children, gather your documents and valuables. Men, follow me. We have to try to cut the fire off from the village." Ignat understood that the old men were no help in fighting the fire. His task was different. He had to save his family. He ran into the house, grabbed an old canvas bag he used to take fishing, stuffed the documents, Maria's diary, and a few photographs into it. Then he opened the door to the porch. "Alma, come to me. Children, follow me," he commanded. The dogs, frightened by the noise and smell of smoke, huddled close to him. He put an old collar on Alma and found some rope to make leashes for the puppies. He was going to take them far away from the village, into the field, in the opposite direction from the fire. But when he opened the gate, he saw Stepan. The dog catcher hadn't run with everyone else to put out the fire. He was standing by his fence, looking at Ignat's house, and in his eyes, lit by the distant flames, burned the same fire, a fire of malice and triumph. Ignat understood everything. This was no accident. This was his doing. At that moment, a strong gust of wind carried not only smoke, but also the crackling of burning trees to the village. The fire had already spread to the forest and was now rapidly approaching. Panic in the village intensified. Ignat realized that he had no time. He had to get the dogs away immediately. He grabbed the leashes tightly and stepped out of the gate. But Stepan blocked his way. "Where are you going, Matveyich?" he hissed. Ignat saw a short, heavy stick in his hand. "Get out of the way, Stepan," Ignat said hoarsely. "I said you're not going anywhere." The dog catcher grinned. "Your dogs are finished, and you're finished too, you old fool." He took a step forward, swinging the stick. Alma, sensing a direct threat to her master, growled fiercely and lunged forward, pulling on the leash. The puppies whimpered in fear. But Ignat was ready, all his rage, all his fear for the few lives entrusted to him, concentrated in a single blow. He was old, but his hands remembered the weight of an axe. He struck Stepan not with his fist, but with the base of his palm, sharply and accurately, in the solar plexus. Stepan gasped, doubled over, dropping his stick. The air whistled out of his lungs. He had not expected such a response from the old man. Ignat did not finish him off. He pushed him into a snowdrift, picked up the puppies, and ran down the street, away from the fire. He ran without looking where he was going, leading his family away from destruction. Behind him, tragedy was unfolding. The fire had reached the outermost houses. Barns were ablaze, and dry picket fences crackled in the flames. Women screamed, and livestock bellowed in panic. The village of Sosnovka was turning into hell. And in the center of this hell, rising from his knees and coughing, stood Stepan. He watched Ignat run away. His plan had failed. The old man and his dogs had escaped him again. And then a new, even more monstrous plan was born in his fevered brain. If he couldn't destroy them, he would destroy everything. Stepan knew that in his shed, in violation of all fire safety rules, there were several full cans of gasoline and a couple of gas cylinders. He always kept a supply for his Niva and for his blowtorch. In a fit of insane rage, he rushed into his yard. He wasn't going to put anything out. He was going to add fuel to the fire. He rolled a gas cylinder into the middle of the yard, grabbed a can of gasoline, and began to douse his own house, barn, and fence. "Burn, burn, burn," he muttered, his eyes shining madly. He wanted to start a fire that no one could escape, a fire that would burn the entire village to the ground, along with all its inhabitants who had betrayed and humiliated him. He did not see that a pair of eyes was watching his actions. Pavel Smirnov, having sent his family to safety, returned to his house for tools. He saw Stepan pouring gasoline over his yard. For a moment, he froze in horror and confusion. Then it dawned on him. Stepan wasn't saving his property. He was setting it on fire. He was helping the fire. "Stepan, what are you doing, you bastard?" Pavel shouted and rushed towards him. But it was too late. Stepan flicked his lighter and threw it onto the gasoline-soaked boards. A fiery explosion scattered them in all directions. Pavel's clothes burst into flames. He fell to the ground screaming, trying to put out the fire. And Stepan, laughing like a madman, stood in the middle of the fiery whirlwind. He had achieved his goal. Now, no one would leave here. And at that moment, there was a loud explosion. It was a gas cylinder that had exploded. A fireball shot up into the night sky, scattering burning debris from the barn dozens of meters around. One of these pieces, a heavy burning beam, hit Stepan on the head, and he collapsed to the ground as if he had been cut down. Ignat, having reached the safety of the field, turned around. He saw a fireball rising above the village and heard the sound of an explosion. His heart sank with horror. He had left people there, his neighbors, those who had built his fence, those who had trusted him. He couldn't just stand there and watch. He tied the leashes to an old power line pole, gave Alma the command, "Guard!" and despite his age and weary heart, ran back into the fire. When he reached the outskirts, he saw a terrible sight. Several houses were already completely engulfed in flames. People were rushing around, trying to save whatever they could. The fire truck, which had finally made its way through the district center, looked like a helpless toy in the face of the fiery element. He saw Pavel lying on the ground, and his wife Olga was trying to extinguish his smoldering clothes with snow. He rushed over to them. "Are you alive?" he shouted, drowning out the roar of the fire. "I'm alive," Pavel moaned. "Burns. Stepan, he blew himself up." Ignat looked toward the dog breeder's house, or rather, what was left of it. A fiery whirlwind. And in that whirlwind, he saw a body lying motionless on the ground. At that moment, a desperate woman's scream came from the burning Smirnov house. "Katya! My daughter is still inside! Katya!" Olga, Pavel's wife, jumped up, trying to rush into the fire. Her neighbors held her back. "She was sleeping in her room. I thought she ran out with us." Everyone froze. The entrance to the house was already cut off by the fire. The roof could collapse at any second. No one dared to go inside. Then Ignat, without a moment's hesitation, tore off his sheepskin coat, soaked it in a snowdrift, threw it over his head, and rushed to the window of the children's room. He broke the glass with his bare fist, feeling no pain, and fell inside. The room was filled with acrid smoke. A little girl of about 5 was sitting on the bed, crying in terror. He grabbed her, wrapped her in the wet sheepskin coat, and climbed out the window the same way he had come in, just as the roof of the house collapsed with a deafening crash. He carried the frightened but alive girl out and gave her to her sobbing mother. Only then did he feel the blood flowing from his hand, cut by glass, and his strength leaving him. He sank down into the snow, breathing heavily. The firefighters finally rolled out their hoses and began to pour water on the fire. The catastrophe caused by one madman was coming to its terrible end. A week passed. The village of Sosnovka resembled a battlefield. Several houses were burned to the ground, including Ignat's house. The residents were temporarily housed in the old school building. Stepan Zakharov, who had suffered severe injuries and burns, was taken under guard to the district hospital. A criminal case was opened against him on several counts. His insane act shocked everyone. Ignat Sokolov became a hero. His deed was written about in the district newspaper. People who had lost everything came up to him and simply shook his hand in silence. He, along with his dog family, also lived in the school. Alma and the puppies who survived the terrible night became everyone's favorites. Children fed them and played with them, forgetting for a while the horror they had experienced. One day, Pavel Smirnov approached Ignat with his hands bandaged. "Thank you, Matveyich," he said simply. "For Katya. We are forever indebted to you. The whole village." He told him that the villagers had decided to rebuild the burned houses together, and his house, Ignat's house, would be the first to be rebuilt. Ignat listened to him, and Alma sat next to him, resting her head on his knees. He looked at his puppies, who were happily playing with the village children. He had lost his home, but he had gained something much greater. He had gained a family, not just 4 dogs, but all these people he had once shunned. On that cold night when he first saw them at his window, he couldn't have imagined how much his life would change. The family of sheepdogs standing in the snow and begging to be let in woke up more than just his sleeping heart. They woke up the whole village, reminding people what compassion, courage, and unity meant. Winter was coming to an end. Spring was ahead. And Ignat knew that together they would build new homes and a new life on the ashes of old hatred and alienation. What choice do you think was the most difficult for Ignat? To risk everything to save the dogs, or to return to the burning village to save the people?